Beyond Book 2. Janis stirs. Chapter 1. Infected. The last several months have been organized chaos for the crew of the Urian. Re-establishing an old Stargate is all-consuming. For Dr. Gibson, there were always injuries to tend to. From mundane ankle strains, contusions, and abrasions to amputations. Lately, a strange virus has swept the crew on one of the Urian supporting ships. The Electrona has been in quarantine for almost 2 weeks. Its crew was cut in half by the rampaging virus. Gibson, who is the head medical officer of the exhibition, has been working tirelessly with his colleagues to find a solution to the mysterious contagion. The weight of lives lost has been hard on him. Every morning starts with a meeting with the research and development team, then a meeting with what is left of the commanding officers of the Electrona. After all that, he has to turn around and give a report to the commanding officer of the fleet, Captain Aruga, whose health over the last couple of months, to Dr. Gibson's relief, seemed to have improved since coming out of stasis. The old captain had him worried for a while. Nothing like waking up from a good long sleep and having to deal with the possibility of shaking up the chain of command of a fleet of 321 ships, he thought while listening to the grave report from the coughing medical officer of the Electrona. One of the problems is that they have not been able to find its origin. None of the logs show contact with any of the nearby planets. The virus itself has been a mystery also. It's been ruled out as an Earth-borne pathogen. So, like most things in science, especially in the field of medicine, the plot thickens from the lack of knowledge. "I would like to end this meeting with some good news," Shania said between a rough coughing spell that made his chest hurt. "We haven't had a death due to the virus over the last 7 hours," she said with a coarse but hopeful voice. "Good," he said, controlling his excitement. "Let us keep a close eye on what's going on and get new samples from a control group. Maybe this thing is burning out." His hope had risen just a tad. He would have something positive to tell the captain, maybe sway his hand and not decommission the Electrona. "Yes, doctor. We should be able to get that information to you within the next 2 hours." "Okay, thank you Shania, and please take care of yourself." "I will," she said after another coughing fit that she covered with a handkerchief that was speckled with a fine spray of blood. With a sigh, Gibson leaned back in his seat exhausted. The new information raced through his mind like particles in an accelerator. He had hoped that at least the communication array would be functional. The engineers said maybe within the next 4 days. But as of now, the fleet was cut off from somewhat spontaneous communication with the Earth. Without the communication from the gate, communication was a painful 3 weeks away. "A message in a bottle, baby," he thought as frustration washed over him. He needed to eat. The roaring organ in his midsection sent a strong message. 2. Shania watched the connection between her and Gibson winked off. Standing up on weak legs, she supported her weight with one hand on her desk. She looked down at the blood-streaked cloth in her other trembling hand. She would need to get her lungs repaired again before more damage was done by this damn virus. Taking out a bottle with a nozzle on the end, she flicked the switch activating the nanobits that lay dormant in the liquid. She waited till the bottle label turned green before taking the nozzle part in her left nostril and compressing the trigger. A thin mist filled her nasal passages with thousands of little bots that would work their way to her lungs and scrap the extra mucus that was trying to make a home on her bronchioles. Shania was a short woman with walnut skin and perfectly dark freckle on the corner of her full mouth. Her brothers called it a witch mole and made fun of her notoriously. The virus had taken a toll on her also, not as bad as the vast majority, but it has been bad. Her clothes hung from her like the skin of a burn victim. She had punched more than a couple of holes in her belt to keep her pants up. Her large intelligent hazel eyes had become slightly sunken in her small skull. Even her breasts were losing their usual fullness. She wondered did Gibson believed her lie. She would have to fudge the reports a bit to reflect the numbers. Gibson had no true way of knowing that the rate of deaths had increased by 15%. All she could hope for was to buy the ship some more time. Shania could feel her lungs clearing up, the nanobits were doing their job. She could almost take a full breath without coughing. She was thankful for that small victory. There haven't been too many of those over the last couple of weeks, she thought, as she worked on the report. Her monitor flickered, along with the lights of her living quarters. What now? She sighed. What now indeed? What the talented medical officer didn't know was that over the last couple of days, there had been a violent notion going around. A notion that was becoming more contagious than the virus that burned through so many lives like fire through a dry wheat field. Chapter 2. Incubation. Fear can resemble a virus, not from a biological point of view, but from a psychological one. Right now, within the Electrona, fear has reached the incubation stage. growing and festering within the unfortunate host. Unlike the bodies of living beings, there is no natural adaptive immune response to fear. No fever to slow down its relentless progress. The only things that can slow fear down are facts, communication, and strong leadership. Unfortunately for the Electrona, the virus had all but destroyed those three pillars. Like a broken dam, the corrosive waters of fear are filling the valley, bearing down on unsuspecting people. Franklin, a young promising plasma engineer, has seen his whole family wiped out over the last couple of days. His father, mother, sister, and paternal grandparents had succumbed to the insidious virus, or the Bane as it has been named. Something within Franklin had snapped, not in the old pick up a gun and slaughter my fellow crewmates. His break had opened him up to all the swirling propaganda that had been mere whispers at first. The fracture of Franklin's psyche presented a dormant talent. The talent a whole Franklin would have probably never tapped into. He had discovered he had a knack for fear-mongering. Once a recluse, only caring about making sure the plasma that made the engines work properly was stable and working correctly, had become a leader for the fearful, paranoid man. His message was flowing through the corridors like a winter's breeze in the spring. Wilted hope and sowing doubt were left in his wake. "We can no longer trust the administration, let alone the Federation," he bellowed to a group of 50. Gatherings were no longer broken up like in the past. Before the virus, one would have to get a permit and worry about security breaking things up if it went too far against the Federation's structure. Franklin was telling a different story than the one Shania would be sitting down to write in a few hours. Franklin would tell of how the deaths rose to staggering levels. The leadership will have to consider decommissioning the ship, it was just a matter of time. It was a standard Federation procedure. The fleet was above all. That's easy to say, as long as you are not the ones being considered a cancer that must be removed from the hull. He said to the growing crowd that was captivated by his fervid speech. We have been abandoned and forsaken. We cannot just sit here and continue to watch our loved ones die. Something must be done. He said, pausing to ensure his message was being received. He could see that it was. The eyes that looked back at him were an echo of his words. The roar of the crowd was growing like a solar wind rushing off a star. Have you not noticed that they don't even have the balls to keep us in the know of what is going on? He said in almost a whisper, causing the crowd even in their excitement to quiet down to listen. Cupping well-worn hands into fists upon his narrow chest, he goes on about what needs to be done and how. 2. Even though the manned police force had been decimated by the virus during the night cycle was a different story. That's when the androids patrolled the streets. The curfew was strictly enforced. Franklin finished his meeting with plenty of time for his new members to get home and think about what was said. Franklin was in his apartment before the artificial dusk fell upon the city. Splashes of orange-red reflected off of the windows of the city had been like a warning to the citizens of the city. The warning that they better have all their business done before the androids are released. The androids were originally designed as a force to help reinforce the crew to repel boarders or as explorers on distant worlds. The chill ran down Franklin's spine as an elongated shadow slowly crept across his tinted window. The droids were basic in design, most of them ran on treads, but they were frighteningly efficient. Franklin never imagined that the droids would be in the way they are now. This made the smoldering outrage that sat in his chest turn into a blaze of mistrust and anger. He hated himself for hiding like a frightened mouse tucked away in the walls to avoid the hungry feline that stalked him. The communication chime got his attention. "Connect," he said while putting on his comm helmet. He walked into the virtual hub where anyone could escape the pain of the horror that had before their present. What had once been a game had become a secure place to gather after hours. Franklin found it astonishing that human beings had been spacefaring civilizations for over 6,000 years and still had a need to be close to one another during times like these. From the dawn of time when mankind huddled together from the mystery darkness to now. Franklin looked through his avatar's electronic eyes and found a new universe, a place without the virus. A place where his family was still there. His father sat with him on a world that must be old Earth. Its solitary sun sat on the horizon as it was poised to begin its journey across the sky. "Hey Lin," his dad said, standing up to meet his oldest son. The simulation of his father was perfect, all the way down to his long dark toenails. His father would always go on and on about how he couldn't wait to be planetside again so he could walk barefoot in the grass. On how feeling the earth under your feet was a spiritual experience. "How are you holding up, son? I hope you've been taking care of yourself. I know my death had to be hard on you," his father's avatar said. Placed a hand on his shoulder. "Yeah, I've been trying, it's just been hard," Franklin said. Then it hit him what the program was saying. How? What? The words tumbled out of Franklin's mouth. After several days of not getting updates from my living self, I figured it was safe to conclude that I no longer exist in the world of the living.